Hey guys, long time no see, I guess. As I'm sure you're all aware, a lot has happened, a lot has changed in our world since I've last done one of these videos. There are people scared, people panicking, rushing to stores to grab all the essentials they possibly need, or items they want.
Here's Mountain Dew Zero!
And yeah, just a lot of mass hysteria. I myself am doing my part by locking myself away from the outside world and completely changing my lifestyle by sitting around and watching movies. So yeah, that's where we are right now. I thought to myself, what better time to talk about the recently released, pretty moderately popular, successful movie on Netflix, The Platform. So yeah, talking about a movie in which degenerates selfishly and irresponsibly hoard a bunch of essential needs and goods to themselves while others below them suffer seemed pretty timely for some reason. So the reason I say this movie is of moderate success is because it's been sitting at Netflix's top 10/popular section for quite some time now. I think this movie benefits highly from the time it was released. While it's not necessarily a global pandemic /dystopian /world crisis movie, it is a film about a man who is trapped and isolated in a small, confined 4x4 chamber. And I think right now quite a few people can relate to that. So this movie kind of beat a lot of movies that I'm sure will be coming out to the curve. I'm sure we're going to see down the line, way after this whole pandemic is hopefully over. I think there's going to be a lot of late to the party, quarantine /apocalyptic movies, just a huge slew of them that come out way when this whole thing's out of everyone's mind. That's just my prediction. Who knows? It's very hard to tell what's going to happen here in the near future, but that's just my prediction. And I think that The Platform definitely benefits from being released at a time when this sort of thing is on people's minds. The basic setup of this movie is that The Platform is a part of a prison called The Hole. Now, this prison is unique in that it is a giant tower with several cells layering it. It's just one single giant pillar that is layered with cell upon cell upon cell. There are two-person cells with a hole in the middle of the floor that look a hole in the middle of the floor and ceiling, I should say, that look up and down to the cell above and below them. So, yeah, that is the basic setup for the world we are in throughout the entirety of this movie. And like all good fish out of water stories, our main character, Go-Rang, is a man who has just been thrown into this prison for a crime that is later specified in the movie, with a man, a cellmate, who has been there far longer than he has, named Trimagasi. Now, Go-Rang is the character that we are seeing this movie's world through, and Trimagasi, of course, acts as a character who can answer Go-Rang's questions in a natural, organic way, and also give us some insight into the movie's world, its premise, and the main conflict for what goes on and how 24 hours looks like in the whole. Every single day, a platform, hence the title of the movie, slowly comes down and stops at each floor for about a minute, 2 minutes, a very brief period of time. And the platform is filled to the brim with food of all sorts. You know, you have elegant meals, fish, chicken, turkey, a bunch of stuff, fruits, vegetables, basically anything you can think of. A bunch of drinks are there too, alcoholic, non-alcoholic. And yeah, it starts at level 1, goes down to level 2, 3, so on and so forth, but it stops for 2 minutes. So, by the time it gets to Go-Rang and Trimagasi's cell, which I believe to start is around the teens, a lot of the food has been eaten already. And so Go-Rang shows disgust towards this. He's like, why would you eat that? That's someone's scraps and leftovers. And Trimagasi says something along the lines of, well, you're going to be hungry soon because this platform only comes to a cell once a day. And then it shoots back to the top. the people upstairs, the organization, I believe they call them, or the association, something like that. Those people upstairs fill it with food for the next day and then send it back down. So immediately what we're given is a parallel to the real world, in which there's definitely a social commentary aspect to this movie. They don't go too deep into it, which is actually something I liked. I like that it's vague enough that you can kind of make your own interpretation, because initially my thought is, okay, well, this is a prison. There are prisoners of all sorts. They rank them due to their class. So, people up top maybe are rich criminals or respected criminals, and then towards the bottom you have your really scummy degenerates. So that's what I was thinking. However, that ended up not being the case, because as Trimagasi explains, the whole is actually, it actually every month shifts its members. So someone who starts off at cell 1 to 5 could the next month very easily be somewhere towards the bottom, whatever number that may be. And so that immediately threw off my perception of what this movie would be about, which actually piqued my interest, because I didn't have the movie figured out quite as much as I thought I did. And so this movie's really good at giving you nuggets and really exploring its concept very well. So I think it's worth mentioning that when I first started watching this movie, I saw that it was a Spanish film, and I was like, okay, cool. So I click on it, start watching, and immediately we hear the narration being done by an English-speaking man, and that threw me off a bit. It's something I've seen in foreign films before, so I was just like, okay, whatever. But as soon as the characters start talking, we hear English dubbing.
What will it be?
Whatever the ones above don't want.
And I was like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. So I went into the settings for Netflix. I set on the English captions and turned on the original Spanish audio, which I highly recommend you folks at home do as well. I think dubbing over a foreign film does a great disservice to not only the filmmakers, but the actors involved as well, and it really takes away from the emotion of their performance. It's not that hard to read subtitles. Bong Joon-ho famously said at his acceptance speech, there's a 1-inch barrier for foreign films, that is subtitles. I believe that to be true, so just bite the bullet and watch it with subtitles, because you're going to be getting a greater experience. Because also in that small amount of time, I realized that the English dub deviated from the subtitles that I think are more accurate to the actual Spanish version of the film. So you're not even getting the same dialogue. You're really doing yourself a disservice. So small note there, watch the movie in Spanish. And I do kind of wish that Netflix would have that option from the get-go, like they did for a film like Roma. I can't imagine watching Roma with an English dub. It would just seem wrong. And the same goes for this movie. I wish that it would just be, sure, an option for people who want to do that. Well, I don't agree with it. Maybe make it an option, but don't have it be the default. That just boggles the mind a little bit. So, going into the actual movie again, like I said, the characters, the cast of characters are very slim. We have basically this one location, and single location movies are very hard to pull off. While to production, it's very attractive, because you can often shoot these movies very cheap, even if they are elaborate sets. One set and one location beats a multitude of locations as far as cost goes. However, from a storytelling perspective, it's hard to keep an audience engaged if you don't have a lot of meat to your story and a lot to kind of build off of your concept. Fortunately, I think the platform, for the most part, has enough to its concept and enough to its characters and storytelling and what it's trying to say thematically. I think there's enough there that will keep audience members engaged. And since this movie has gotten popular, I think that it has done quite that. So as I said before, this movie starts off with in Goreng's shoes. We see that he starts to bond with his cellmate Trimagasi. Trimagasi at first kind of shrugs him off as kind of, this, oh, annoyance, just another cellmate. But we learn more about the world through him, and because of their bond, we start to see that they begin to like each other. They grow stronger as friends. When you are put in the hole, you are able to bring one thing from the outside world with you with no restrictions. Some people bring weapons. Smarter characters will bring something like a rope to try and escape. Anything you want, really. Goreng, being more educated and kind of pensive, brings a book. And so that's one of the things that they bond through, which I thought was a nice little moment. Trimagasi likes it when Goreng reads to him. And of course, eventually Goreng swallows the pill and decides to start eating the food, unsanitary as it may be, which is also something funny and ironic I found about this movie. During a time where people are so on edge to even look at someone too long, the fact that these characters are having to eat off of someone's leftovers, is a very gross concept that I think is heightened due to the time we're in right now, the very sanitized, overly cautious society we're kind of undergoing right now. So I want to go into this movie's story a little more without getting into too much and spoiling it. But I will say, going a little further into the story, we are introduced to a character named Maharu, who is a very grizzled, hair unkempt, overall just unsanitary looking woman who approaches the main characters by riding down on the platform, standing on the food in a kind of huddled position. She looks almost feral, and this obviously disturbs and unsettles Goreng. He's questioning what she's doing there, and Trimagasi is not fazed at all. He says this is a character who he regularly sees. She rides the platform down every so often to try and find her lost child who's somewhere in the hole. This, of course, kind of piques Goreng's interest, because he's like, why is there a child here? What is she doing in this prison? And is she here still? Can she be found? So that is really what sets off the movie's plot. Trimagasi is more worried about staying in the cell, serving his time, and being freed, which will happen in this movie's timeline in about a couple months from when we were first introduced to the characters. So he doesn't want any part of this adventure. Goreng is a little more curious and wants to kind of stick it to the man a little bit more. And of course, him being our hero, there's going to be some conflict there. So yeah, that's what sets off the movie. We are later introduced to a character as Goreng goes along his mission. We're introduced to a character named Baharat, who is a man who also is interested in not only escaping, but finding this lost child. So that's when our two real main characters come face to face and embark on this journey together. And essentially what their plan is to get to the floor where the young girl is, which they believe to be the bottom of the hole, if there is one. And that's something that becomes a little more evident as they go along, is maybe there isn't a bottom. What if there is? When does this thing stop? And something very interesting about this film when it gets into its darker sections is the further down the platform goes, the more desperate, hungry, angry the cellmates get. And so we see the very grim, dark side of this world, and just imagine how horrible it would be to be placed at one of the bottom chambers of this hole where barely or no food gets to you. So it really makes you think, and that's where some of the social commentary comes back into play a little bit. You can kind of view these lower chambers as, the impoverished part of our world or society, whatever you want to think. And that's what I like, is this movie is pretty vague with its concepts and comments, so much so that you can kind of, without it feeling like a hindrance to the movie, you can kind of assume your own interpretations of what those symbols or things mean. And while I did before praise this movie's vagueness, its kind of ambiguity, I do think that it is one of the stronger and weaker elements of this film. I think the first half of the movie shrouds the world in enough darkness, but gives enough answers that makes us want to keep following this bread trail and figure out what this movie's about. However, the second half of the movie, I can't quite say the same thing. Ironically enough, this movie reminds me a lot of the Cube films. The premise of this movie sounding a lot like the Cube movies. The Cube films are hindered by the fact that they try to explain things too much, and you lose that intrigue, kind of like any great horror movie. The more you try to explain the conflict, the less threatening, less intriguing it gets. And I think that is true, but I do think you need something that the audience can keep seeking after. They can keep thinking about, giving them enough, but not too much. You have to kind of find that balance, and I don't think this movie really does that all the way through. We get to the end of the movie, and the gore levels go up in the movie. I will say that if you are squeamish, I maybe wouldn't recommend this movie. I do think it serves the purpose of the film. I don't think it ever feels gratuitous or exploitative, but it does have its fair share of blood and guts. So something to keep in mind. It is a very grim film, very bleak. And it does have its ethereal moments, which I think is where it kind of loses me a little bit. There are flashbacks to characters that visually I think work for the most part, but are repeated so constantly that it kind of loses the weight that it originally had. That was something that kind of bugged me a little bit. And the images themselves, after seeing them so much, kind of grow goofy. I'm not sure if that was just me who picked up on that, but people who have seen the movie may know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a character who comes back via flashback that every time they show their face, it just kind of rings somewhat comical to me. So yeah, I'm not sure if that was the exact intention of this film, but it just kind of felt distracting. There's also a character that our main heroes eventually reach, who is somewhere towards the bottom of the hole itself, and the character is very polished, unscathed, doesn't look hungry or hurt at all, which I think is kind of hard to believe. The character, of course, is used as a symbol, so I can kind of get that. But for a movie that is so grounded and takes itself so seriously, it didn't really feel believable to me. And that's another thing. I mentioned Cube earlier. While I do think the platform is much better, more well-written, produced, directed, the overall look of this movie works better than Cube. I do think that the platform could have benefited from taking itself a little less seriously, like the Cube movies kind of did. Kind of. So yeah, while the serious tone of the platform does work for the first half, I do think it kind of falls apart in the second, because where's a character I mentioned before that's used as a symbol, but it's done so in a very kind of vague, almost like putting this character on a pedestal type thing, and it doesn't quite work. Overall, I did find this movie to be good. I found it to be entertaining. I think most who watch it, who have both the stomach for it and are in the mood for a film like this, I think will find enjoyment from it. I don't think that its shortcomings towards the end damage it overall. Everything it did before, storytelling-wise, I think works really well. And all throughout the movie, you have a well-produced, well-directed, great-looking movie. The visuals in this film are great. While this only takes place in, like I said, one location, for the most part, it does so very effectively. It doesn't feel dull, even though it's taking place in this very drab prison cell. All the shots feel fresh and new. There's a lot of stuff towards the end that I think worked really well. There's one shot in particular where you just see the platform hovering down with a light shining on it, and I thought that looked great. Very reminiscent of a shot from The Descent that I felt worked to a similar extent. So yeah, there's a lot of great stuff happening here. I don't think any of that disappears at the end of the movie. It just kind of falls apart from a storytelling perspective. There's a lot more I wanted to learn about not only our characters, but what the world of the whole looked like, why they were needing to complete this mission and what the end result of that mission would be. We don't get a lot of that towards the end of the film. There's one thing I really did like about this movie. We see not only the various levels of the hole, but we also see way above the kitchen staff / inspecting staff of the prison preparing these elaborate meals. And despite the fact that they're preparing them for these criminals, some of which who have done horrible, horrible things, they're doing it with such delicacy and such care, and then sending it down for these meals to be devoured by the people below them. I think that I found very interesting. It's not just these prison slop meals they throw together and toss down the hole and say, enjoy, you know. They're these well put together meals being made by very talented people in the culinary department. So yeah, I thought that was cool. There's like a small moment where a character gets a hair in something and he gets like chewed out by the head staff member. He like matches it up with every person in the staff and like scolds him. I was like, okay, so they take this seriously. And I thought that was an interesting layer that I wish would have been explored more. And I think that's the movie's main problem. It has such a great premise and so many good ideas that they don't really handle with as much care as I would have liked. Overall, I did enjoy this movie. Like I said, it's pretty inconsequential because it's on Netflix, so you're watching it practically for free. I get there's the subscription fee, but you know, there's always going to be that regardless if you watch this or not. So I do think that this movie is worth a view. I think it says some interesting things and has been released at a very interesting time during our society / world crisis. I think it's going to ring true and kind of have a lot of elements that people can relate to because of where we are right now. And yeah, overall, I definitely think it is worth a watch. So yeah, I actually had a lot more to say about this movie than I expected, which is a good thing. It's a compliment to the movie and the filmmakers. I think that while I don't agree and like everything this movie did, I think it opens a lot of room for discussion and dialogue with other people who have seen it. Which is a great thing about film. I hope that Netflix and other platforms like it take more chances on weird, interesting ideas like this, because as we've seen time and time again, there is an audience for this type of stuff. So I hope to see more like it in the near future. But until then, I hope you guys are all staying safe. I hope you're taking this whole thing seriously, but also with a grain of salt and staying informed. And most of all, healthy. So yeah, until next time, guys, I will see you and stay tuned. Okay. Time to watch more movies, I guess. Well, that's not good.